Hello, everyone. I want to welcome you to Pursuing Purposeful Work Right Now webinar. I am Shauna, and I'm the Communications and Operations Manager for the Nashville Institute for Faith and Work, and we are so glad you have joined us today. This is the first webinar of a three-part series, and today we will be talking about chore work versus treehouse work with NIFW's Executive Director, Rosewyn Brooks, and President and Founder of the Volca Center, Dr. Chip Roper. A few logistical notes. We are recording this webinar and it will be available to view on our website if you would like to rewatch or refer to someone else you might think might benefit from this conversation. Please feel free to submit a question at any point during the webinar in the Q&A feature, which you can find at the bottom of the screen. If you have any issues or comments, you are also welcome to write them in the chat. I would like to now introduce you to Rosewyn Brooks. Rosewyn is the Executive Director of NIFW. After 30 years in sales, marketing, and strategy for global 100 companies, Rosewyn has experience with and a deep understanding of the best and worst of corporate America. Rosewyn grew up in Virginia, a coal miner's daughter, and graduated from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, with continuing executive education from Columbia University and Harvard Business School. She has worked for Citicorp, Siemens Financial Services, and Siemens Healthcare. Rosewyn loves a big challenge and the opportunity to work with people growing in God's grace. After many corporate moves, she is grateful to be here in Nashville. Now I'm going to hand it over to Rosewyn, who will start the discussion on pursuing purposeful work right now.
Thank you, Shauna. Well, I am really excited to be here with you all today, and we're honored to have you with us, of course. And for those of you who are not familiar with the Nashville Institute of Faith and Work, our mission is to advance faith and work integration for people to embrace their work as a venue of God's mission in Nashville and beyond. And we do that through equipping, connecting, and mobilizing, which is the purpose of this webinar. So we want to connect you with Chip Roper and the Volca Center so that you are equipped with a framework and you can be mobilized with tools for finding purposeful work right now. It's a very uncertain time, a lot of disruption, all the words that we have used ourselves and hear over and over again. So we'd like to get a little view into who is joining us today. So we have a couple of polls. And Shauna, if you would put the first poll up, just very quickly, if you could take a few seconds and tell us which describes your current work situation right now. Unemployed, looking for work, employed, not looking for work, employed, looking for work in case of a furlough or a layoff, and if you're just unsure or other. So I'll give that about 10 seconds. Okay. Let's see. Can we see the results of that poll? All right. So it looks like 8% of you are unemployed and looking for work. 46% not looking for work, and 31% looking in case of a furlough. So about 39%, and then 15% not sure. All right. Great. So we also have another one that we want to understand what industries are here today. And if you would just let us know what industry you are, that most represents your work experience. And we'll give that about 10 seconds as well. Okay. Let's see what we have here. So 50% corporate, 25% nonprofit. Okay, good, very good. All right, and one more, actually two more. How has your work changed as a result of COVID-19? I know some of us are busier than ever. Some have been dislocated or furloughed. So if you would let us know, if you take a quick look at this for about 5 seconds and let us know where you land here. Okay. Busy or more demanding? Slowed or stalled. Okay, good. 50%, 33% slowed down or stalled. And then we have a couple of people who are seeking actively. All right. And then the final poll is how secure do you feel in your work today? Very secure for those of you that are with us today and engaged in work. How secure do you feel? Very, somewhat secure, somewhat insecure, or very insecure? And do we have results of that? Okay, good. So we have about 64% that feels secure and 29% insecure, and one person very insecure. All right, thank you for that, Shauna. So I'd like to go ahead and get us into this. And first I'd like to introduce Chip to you. He is the president of Volca Center, and NIFW and Volca have partnered for several years together, mainly because he has this mission to rescue people from the forces that rob them of effectiveness and joy, and in particular in work transitions. And that's really what we're talking about today. For the most part. So he is a certified executive coach from Columbia University and tackles the vocational challenge from a really unique perspective, I think. 30 plus years with P&L responsibility as a small business owner, a pastor, a career coach now, and a business consultant. And he is also the associate professor of entrepreneurship at King's College in New York City. So welcome, Chip. It is delightful to be doing this with you. And I'm excited for you to be able to share your framework starting today and beginning this journey toward finding a job with purpose and meaning. I would guess that the people that we have with us today are a little more secure than perhaps some of those that you've been talking with in the New York area and perhaps other parts of the United States. But I think it's, with even before COVID started, Gallup had reported that only 30% of people are engaged in their work, have purpose and meaning. So certainly this framework applies to whether you're looking for that purpose and meaning in your current work or in future work.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Rosewyn. It's great to be here, and good to see some friends in the participant list. I saw Brian and Neil and Ken. So great to be here with you. And I would say, yeah, these questions about purpose and meaning in our work are questions that we really face kind of all the time, and we tend to attract people that are finding themselves at some kind of an intersection in their careers and are wondering kind of, how do I navigate to my next? And so today, and really starting today and over the next 3 weeks, we want to walk through a process of understanding how we find purpose in our work, even if our work is looking for work, or even if our work right now is pretty secure, but we're not sure what's going to happen in the future. And if anything, any of us have learned in the last 3 months, it's that we don't know what's going to happen in the future. So, that's kind of obvious and to us all now in some ways a painful way. But one of the things that we like to say at Volca is that the opportunity favors the prepared. And I think there's some biblical counsel about being prepared, anticipating what's coming. And So no matter where you are kind of on the lens, it was very helpful to hear from all of you on the polls. Just, opportunity favors the prepared. So whether you're in the middle of a search or you may need to be in the middle of one at some point in the future, this will be for you. And then just another kind of personal piece before we jump into some of the material here. Transitioning in your career can be a very, very challenging experience. And I've been through, this is my third career, and this one had kind of a false start way back in 2010. And I went through a 15 months of searching and didn't find anything that was a good fit. And it was it was discouraging. There's elements of it that were just, you lose a lot of your confidence in that process. And as a Christian, you kind of wonder, well, where's God in this? I felt like I was supposed to pursue something new and it didn't materialize. And, that sort of spun out, and on hindsight, I can see some reasons why it was actually good for me to stay where I was. And then a few years later, I embarked on a second search. And this one is the one that led me to New York City, where I live now, and to founding Volca. So it's kind of interesting to see how timing's a piece of this and so forth. But, for those of you who are in the middle of this, and almost all of you are at least at some level of insecurity, or a significant percentage of you, almost 60%. I understand that to a certain extent. And I think that some of the things I want to share with you today are things that I found really helpful for me in my journey, as well as with our work for clients. So let's jump into it. The first big idea that we want to talk about is that to find purpose in our work now, we need to anchor our work in a robust sense of calling. And you see, men are not very good at multitasking, so I have to do the slides and talk to you at the same time. So I'll do my best. But the first idea is calling, and the idea that if we have a robust sense of calling, it can really help us have an enduring sense of purpose in our work when our work is changing, as it is for all of us in these times, and if we're changing our work. And so what is calling? Calling is one of those terms that has kind of been ruined in some ways. It's been ruined in history because calling was sort of the sole possession of the clergy. The clergy were called. They talk about their call, and everybody else is sort of left to sort of figure it out. There's even a secular version of that on the subway here in New York City. For a while, there was an advertisement for a medical school that said, "Follow your calling, become a doctor." And so, in just a purely secular point of view, we think of some jobs that benefit others, jobs that have a sense of cause or altruism baked into them. We think of those as callings, and the rest of us just have jobs. And so I think that kind of can mess with us in this word calling. And one final issue sometimes we get into with calling, especially I think those of us who are younger, we tend to think like, I have one calling, I've got to find it, and if I don't get it right, my life will be ruined. And these are all myths that we just want to blow up this afternoon or this morning for you guys in Nashville. I will mess up the time zone repeatedly, I promise. But anyway, back to calling. Calling, what is calling? And it's two things. It's a divine invitation and it's a divine summons. And the invitation is the idea that God is privileging us to share in some responsibility for his world. And when somebody calls you and invites you into something fun or challenging or worthwhile, it's an invitation. And it's a very, very positive thing. But calling is also a summons. When the God of the universe calls, it's not really optional. It's not, well, I think I'll think about it. It's kind of like we're being voluntold, I guess, in some ways when God calls us into something. And so really what we're talking about when we talk about calling is we're talking about finding what God's will is and doing it. And I think many of us would say, when I really know what God wants me to do and I can really say I'm doing it, there's a tremendous sense of peace and confidence that comes into my life. And so that's why calling anchors us and gives us purpose. When we talk about calling, we have a 5-dimensional model. I said a robust version of calling will give you a sense of purpose in your life. And our first calling is actually not to a task, it's to a person, it's to Christ. We're called to him, we're invited into, summoned into relationship with him, surrendering to his provision of forgiveness and power to live a new life. And Os Guinness makes this point in his classic book, The Call, where he says, it's to whom, not to what. And we have a first level calling, and then we have a second tier list of callings. And so our first level calling is to Christ. It's into a relationship. And I'm sure many of you found in different ways that some of your relationships are actually stronger in this post-COVID landscape, that you've had longer intentional conversations actually on FaceTime or Zoom than you sometimes do in person, and you've had to block out time that's focused on those key people in your lives. And our relationship with Jesus is something that is constant, or can be constant. And I know I don't mean that there's not ups and downs and that's so forth. I just mean that it's something that is accessible to us no matter what's happening in our work lives. From this primary calling to Christ, we think there are 4 subsidiary or second tier callings. One is to your family. One is in the area of work, which is what we're going to be primarily focused on for the rest of this series. A third is to your church or your spiritual community. And a fourth is to your neighbor. And we like this model for several reasons. So one is that each area is equally important. Each area is equally part of our calling to God. It's not that any one of them is more or less important. Second, it provides a enduring sense of purpose, even when the demands in different circles change, like the circles expand or shrink. So, a number of you said that your work circle's actually gotten bigger in the last, whatever it's been, 8-10 weeks than it was before. It's gotten more demanding. Mine has too. What's interesting is family circle has probably changed as well, because work is home and home is work for a lot of us. And so, I found myself working at home, and I also found myself, because I'm the cook, cooking a lot more, because it's very, it's complicated to go out and watching pennies and so forth and everything. So in some ways, my vocation in each of those areas, my calling in each of those has expanded in COVID. And if we were having this webinar 2 weeks ago, we might leave it there. We would say churches changed a little bit. We're doing all that virtually, and I'm not sure what we would say about neighbor. That could be different for each of us. But given everything that's transpired in the last week or so, many of us are also sort of are thinking about, well, what's it mean to be a neighbor? And to people that are having a very different experience in terms of around these issues around race and discrimination and injustice. And so, but this is dynamic, and it says that there's purpose in every area of your life, that there's God-defined purpose, and there's a calling to each. And so we like this model because it says no matter what you're doing, no matter where the demands are, if you've had to really throttle back on work and take care of a family member, or if work's ramped up, it's all part of your calling. So that's kind of our first big idea. I'm going to invite Rose Wynn back on. Maybe we'll talk about that a little bit, and then we'll move on to our second.
Yeah, I really, this resonates with me quite a bit. Like you, I've been through, I think it has been 3 transitions. I don't think I knew that specifically about you, Chip, but I've been through 3 transitions as well. And it's really easy just to get back on the treadmill of finding a job. So I really think finding this centeredness, to know that you are, you have this invitation to be with Christ, I think is really special, to have that knowledge. And I know for myself personally, I did not have that knowledge before.
I have an anchor.
Pardon me?
Like an anchor, or it's like a place. It's a solid center or place of stability to navigate the dynamic changes in all the other areas.
And you're feeling the earth move under you, to realize that you do have this anchor is just provides for a more creative energy and confidence in moving forward. And so I love that. Thank you for that.
Great. Anything else on that, Rose Wynn, or should we move on to the next?
I think we could move on. I think.
All right. Yeah, and if you guys have questions on that, throw them into the Q&A, and we'll come back to that chart. Need to, but on to meaning.
Chip, we don't have the slides up. Can you, there you go.
There we go. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, you know, men can't multitask, Rosewin, so you know how that works. So,
I'm learning.
yeah. Let me see here. There we go. So the next thing, and we're gonna spend the rest of our time on this today, has to do with meaning. Meaning comes from calling. Meaning also comes from understanding. Purpose comes from calling. Purpose also comes from understanding the different potentials we have for meaning in our work. So I'm going to fill out this grid with you, and then make a few observations, and then we'll really be ready for your questions. So keep thinking with us. But if you imagine this first as a graph, the x-axis, which is the one that goes this way, is about experience. So how do you experience your work? So that's really, in some ways, it's a subjective thing, and it's about how you relate to it, what your work kind of does for you. I'll explain that momentarily. But the y-axis, which is the one that goes up and down, that is how you approach your work. That has to do with the story that you frame it in. And we're going to talk about both as we go. So on the x-axis, the first idea we have up here, we can experience our work as a chore. And I don't know about you, but I learned my first exposure to work, besides this mysterious place that my father disappeared to every day. My first experience really of work myself was when I had to do chores. And so the way I define a chore is usually they're hard, or at least unpleasant. You know, we don't enjoy them. And chores are work we have to do so we can get to do what we want to do. That's a chore. It's work I have to do so I can get to do what I want to do. And it's a whole element of our work. You may be thinking about specific tasks you need to do in your job, your current job, or jobs that you've had in the past. They're chores. My first career, I was an electrician, and I learned that career as a shop boy, and meaning you just do what you're told. That's what shop boys do. And I remember our supervisor for the day gave us this job of moving a whole pile of wooden pallets, like hundreds and hundreds of them, very heavy. At least they're very heavy when you're 16. And it's like move them from here to there. There's absolutely no reason they needed to be moved from here to there, but he just gave it to us. That is a quintessential example of a chore to me. It's pointless, it's hard, it's boring, and there's chore work. And I was exposed to that when I was a kid, and I had to clear the table and take out the trash before I could go play. But there's another kind of work, and again, I was exposed to this as a child, and you can think about when you were a child, there's probably some equivalent of this in your story as well. And I call it treehouse work. And boy, I used to love to build tree houses. And I say that because, you know, they wouldn't have been written up in any kind of home magazine or anything like that. They were more like 2 planks and a platform and a tree, but they were a treehouse to us. And when I think back, I reflect on the process of actually accomplishing that. And some of them were actually at, you know, pretty significant height above the ground. I'm really surprised my mother let us do it, but I'm glad she did. But anyway, when I look at the process, it was work. I mean, we had to gather materials, we had to get tools, we had to have a plan. We exerted a lot of effort. You know, there were smashed thumbs and scrapes and cuts and a lot of sweat. And that's what work looks like. And yet it never felt like work to build a treehouse. And so we have a word for this kind of work. It's called flow. And flow is a state where the rising challenges of the situation are met by your rising skills. So you're being stretched and pulled and accomplishing more and more and more. That's called flow. And that's what treehouse work often is like. It's like we feel like sometimes we say we're in the zone. Some of us even feel like, you know, we get chills when we do that kind of work. Some of us, you know, when you're in a treehouse mode of work, you may not feel the need to even eat. You know, it just gets so enthralled in what you're doing that you can just do it for hours and hours. So that's Treehouse work. So on the experience axis, we've got chore work that's hard, boring, unfulfilling, and we've got Treehouse work where we experience the state of flow. So now let's move to the the approach axis. And I want to divide it into secular and sacred. And for those of you who've been traveling with NAFW, and we're kind of in a similar framework, we'd say, well, all work is sacred. Like all work that people do in the world is part of God's sacred plan, part of his kingdom. And we say that too. Well, that's not the context or frame I'm using this terminology in today with you. I'm talking not about kind of the analysis of work, that is it secular or sacred. I'm talking about the frame we bring to our work. And there's a secular way of approaching work, and there's a sacred way of approaching work. And it kind of gets into a larger idea about where we get our purpose from our work. I'll come back to that later. But secular work is work that's done for me, and it's work that's done by me. And it's up to me to figure it out, to make it happen. That's the by me part. And it's for me because it's for my benefit. And even if I say I'm providing for my family, I was just on a call with a client this morning, and he's trying to, as over time, some of his values are changing and his priorities are changing. And he worked, all the time and made a lot, what most of us would probably consider a lot of money. And he said, I would say it was for my family, but it was really for me. It was really about a kind of image that I wanted to portray and a kind of vision of success that I wanted to attain to, so people would admire me, and I would feel like I was okay. So it's really for me and by me. Sacred work, on the other hand, there's certainly an element that we do it for ourselves, and we do it. We are doing the work and we do it for ourselves, but there's much, much, much more. Sacred work is work that we do for God, with God, and for others. And probably all of us would buy into the idea that, well, our life, it shouldn't be all about us, that we should do something for other people. Sometimes we compartmentalize that, and we think of our work as here, and then over here I serve at this charity, or do something in my church, or do something in my community. But we've found that in one of the things that really, as we study what people take away from their work and what really they remember and what makes the biggest difference for them, it's almost always the impact their work has on others. And so the for others piece is pretty easy to argue from either a Christian point of view or not a Christian point of view. But the other two are really significant as well, and kind of take the sacred to a whole nother level, I think. Because we can do our work for God. And many of us are, I think, probably familiar with Colossians 3:23, do your work for the Lord, and he will reward you, which is actually a very revolutionary statement if you ponder it for any length of time. This statement is written to ancient Roman slaves who had to do a bunch of, I'm sure, a number of terrible chore tasks, and yet they could do it for God, and God would notice it, and God would care about it, and God would reward them for it. That's probably a revolutionary idea for most of us. But we like to even take it a step further than for God, and we want to unpack the idea that we can actually do our work with God. And I'll throw a couple scripture references at your way on this one. Two Psalms, Psalm 127 and Psalm 104. So in Psalm 127, it says, unless the Lord builds a house, the builders build in vain. Unless the Lord guards the city, the guards protect in vain. And so it's saying that God is out in the world and he's building. He's still building. And it's saying that God is out in the world and he's protecting. And Psalm 104 talks about, in the middle of verse 15, I believe it is, talks about how God provides the things that we need for our food. And those things are oil, wine, and bread. But you don't get oil, wine, and bread without human effort. So once again, we see that first of all, what's God doing? God's providing. How's God doing it? Well, he provides the raw material, and then he's working with and through people. And so part of thinking about your work from a sacred point of view is identifying, how does your work build? How does your work protect? And how does work provide? How does it build? How does it protect? How does it provide? And realizing that whenever you're doing those kinds of tasks, you're not just doing it for God and for others, you're actually doing it with Him. And so a secular point of view of work, or a sacred point of view of work, is really different than a sacred one. We're no longer alone. It's no longer just about us. It's with God, for God, and for others. And I failed at my PowerPoint work, but I'm just going to put them all up here. Sorry about that. So when you net all this out, you get 4 meanings of work, 4 different definitions of purpose in work. And down at the bottom left quadrant, when you're doing chores and you do it from a secular point of view, you get work that your meaning in your work is that work is a grind. That's what it is. It's just something I have to suffer through, and I just have to suffer through this work. I have to plow through it. I have to survive it. And some of us may have even found recently that, as at least if you're like me, when things change rapidly, sometimes it takes me a little while to catch up. And like maybe you started with, you were above the line and you kind of had a generally sacred approach to your work, but it's gotten so demanding that it's becoming more, it's sucking it down into that bottom left quadrant, and you're feeling all alone and you're feeling overwhelmed and you're not sure where this is all going. But that's grind. When we approach our work from a secular point of view, and it's Treehouse work, in other words, we really love it. We feel a strong sense of agency and efficacy, and we make it happen. Then our work quickly becomes our God. It becomes the source of satisfaction, a source of joy, a source of meaning in our lives. And it's obvious it's our God, because if anyone messes with it, tells us we should work less, if our job security is threatened, we become unglued. We become unraveled in one way or another. And so we have these 2 secular perspectives on work, that it's either a grind or it's a God. And then we have the opportunity to move above the line. And this is what I alluded to earlier. We don't derive our sense of purpose from our work. We bring our sense of purpose to our work. So those prepositions are really important. We don't derive our purpose from our work. We bring our purpose to our work. We have to move above the line, that secular sacred line, to really have an enduring sense of purpose or meaning in our work. And when we do, we get 2 more experiences of work, two more definitions of the meaning in our work. We do chore work, but we do it from a sacred perspective. It's about growth. It becomes about growth. It's a place where, even though the work is hard and unfulfilling, God is still at work in us, and even through us to the people around us. And so there's a sense that even if we're not doing the job we hoped we would do, or we had to put on our advancement, the next career move, because everything slowed down because of COVID, or we actually have to do some other kind of job that we hadn't planned on, because that's where there's demand right now, because the whole labor market is kind of in turmoil. It's still not a loss. It's still not a disaster, because God is still there. He's still with us. He still cares about that work. He's still working with us in that work, and He's growing us through that work. And then the idea is that when you're above the line and you actually get to do, you're doing your work for God, with God, for others, and it really flows. You view that work as a gift. It's interesting, the book of Ecclesiastes, ancient wisdom, part of the wisdom literature in the Bible, which is a fairly depressing book. If you read it's certainly not a cheery book of encouragement. But one of the interesting positive things that's repeated 2 to 3 times in Ecclesiastes is that when you are in moments or places or seasons where you can enjoy the work that you've been given to do, it says that is a gift from God. It's a gift from God when you get to do that treehouse kind of work. And so treehouse sacred is gift. Now, as we're in this COVID moment, where there's a lot of uncertainty. We certainly saw a lot of uncertainty in the polls. Some of you are looking for work. Some of you think you will be. Part of what can be helpful about this framework is to think, instead of thinking about a job being 100% chore or 100% treehouse, it's to think about the chore small c elements of a job and the treehouse elements small t elements of a job. In other words, here's the job. So but how much of that job aligns with kind of what's in the chore house, or the chore side for you, and what's on the treehouse side for you. And every little treehouse thing that you get to do, view that as a gift. It's kind of one of those mental or mindset practices that kind of can carry you through and help you through a time when work may be different. Even if part of what's making your work feel like a chore is just the overwhelming demand that you experience for your time. And people I talk to feel like they're busier than ever and less productive than ever. And but still remembering, stepping back, taking a deep breath, identifying those treehouse pieces that you find in your work and celebrating them, because there's still gifts in the mix. What else do we want to say about this? Rosewanne, you can come on back on and we'll talk more about this.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to think about the meaning in the chore work, because particularly if you're, as you said, Chip, your work level has gone up significantly, there's probably a lot more perhaps repetition to what you're doing, potentially, or you're out on a limb in some ways trying to find a new way forward. So it's interesting to think about the different ways that you can have that chore work. Do you kind of think of chore work as necessary, and does it lead to treehouse work?
I think it could vary on our, on our where we are, how well what we are doing aligns with where the market for talent is and is going. And that can change from city to city and changes from time to time. I mean, the old school idea was that you do your chore, like even in your career, you pay your dues. You're the intern, you go get coffee, and you get the bagels for everybody. Like, you just do whatever you need to do. You do the grunt work kind of idea, and then you kind of earn your way up. And I think, a lot of our clients are in finance, and at least the way, many of them, the first 2 or 3 years in finance, they worked insane hours, and they were at the beck and call of whoever their managing director was. And it's really true. Like, they had to do the chores to get to the treehouse. There's no question about it.
We have a question that someone wants to, Deneen Johnson would like to clarify. The bottom right corner God refers to tasks and or work that because we do that can become an idol or a God in our lives. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Clarify that?
Yeah, so we're talking about the intersection of its treehouse in the sense that it really aligns with what we love to do and our talent. So it feels great. We feel competent to do it. And, for lack of a better term, we're winning. It's going well. But we're approaching it from a secular frame. We're approaching it as, this is work I'm doing, and I'm doing it for me. And so that actually robs it of its gospel significance. Now it's my show. We're all the way back to the Garden of Eden, and like, you will become like God. This was the temptation in Genesis 3. And we're at a place where it's like, yeah, I'm actually able to feel like God through my work. I'm guaranteeing my sense of power and ability. I'm also guaranteeing my security, and it's becoming everything. So I don't know, does that answer that question?
Yeah, I think so. I think you self-identify with your work more than you do than as a child of Christ, for example. And I know for myself, I definitely got there where I was my work, and it really was not surprising. Or I would think it was appalling if somebody didn't work at least 60 hours a week. You know, it was part of who I was. It was everything, which
Right.
is not a great place to be. Plus the results of your work important to you as well, because it reflects on you versus on the glory of God, I guess, in a very basic way. And we have one other question, Chip. How do our skills and abilities relate to our experience of chore elements and treehouse elements in our work?
That's a great question. So our skills and abilities really, we think they define what Treehouse really looks like. We're going to go into this in real depth next week. But yeah, how do you move from chore to Treehouse, or at least understand what a chore is versus Treehouse? I mean, most of us are probably pretty adept at saying, yeah, that felt like a chore. So it's a reaction. But how do you identify the kinds of things that are going to be in that kind of treehouse zone? So there's a couple pieces to that, and a lot of this really, the chore treehouse axis really is about, in some ways, it's about self-discovery. It's about, Psalm 139 says we're fearfully and wonderfully made. Well, it's about filling in the blanks about how you were fearfully and wonderfully made. It's about understanding the things that you're going to naturally. It's understanding the kinds of skills and environments, the skills that you can bring to the table where you can really make a contribution. Most of us really care about making a contribution. We want to know where we can make a difference. And then it's also about understanding, the kinds of things that really aren't going to work well. And being able to know what to say no to is just as important as what to say yes to, and defining that treehouse. So there's a movement from chore to treehouse, at least in terms of being able to identify it, that we think is really important. And we're going to give you a lot of detail on that next week, in next week's webinar, about the very, very specific questions we can ask ourselves. And while we're talking about movement, how do we move from secular to sacred? Because that's, in some ways, more important. Because it's that move from the bottom up to the top of the chart that really brings us meaning and brings us enduring purpose in our work. And I think, this is why the work that you guys do at NIFW is so important, because you're constantly bringing gospel framework, faith framework, and applying it to work. Great churches do that, of course. But this gets into the realm of, how do we think Christianly? How do we change our minds, renew our minds, kind of Romans 12, 1 and 2 kind of practices. And at some level, that's the same for everybody. I mean, the people that we work with who are really able to do this, they have pretty regimented in terms of the way they bring in a spiritual diet that changes the way they look at things. And the people that don't, it's not too hard to, reverse engineer what's going on. And when we talk about survey data, 70% of Christians approach their work below that line. They approach their work from a secular frame, and they're constantly cycling between grind and God, and they're kind of can be stuck in a loop. Even though kind of officially they have the worldview and the belief system that could pull them above, and that could really change the way they experience their work. And but that's a spiritual practice side of this process, whereas the chore to treehouse piece is more about self-awareness.
Yeah, I think it's about discipline and self-awareness, as you said, but also I think there's so many messages that we receive, because we're always receiving these messages of the secular world about hard work and consumerism, that to know that you can move above the line in a sacred way. Sometimes it's just information.
Yeah.
It's just knowing how to do it, which is what I think is exciting about this process and this framework that you have. You were talking about chore work, and I was thinking about, you know, all of the reports that we would have to do. The more, you know, the worse the business was doing, the more reports that had to be done.
Mm.
And I always sometimes felt like, you know, if we didn't have to do the reports, we could fix the problems. So yeah, but if you take a different frame like you're talking about and look at that for being for others, there could be a lot of good changes in reporting.
Yeah, I mean, we were just working through some of this we have an executive group here in New York that we meet once a month, and we were talking a little bit about just that with God idea, and you know, the principles being that anything you do that's building or creative, that's a with God task. He's creating and building. That anything you do that's protecting or redemptive is a with God task. It's not just for, you know, it's not just for him. He's actually working that way in the world still. And then the idea that providing, and if any ways the work you're actually doing provides for others, that's God. That's part of what God does. He provides for people through the work of people. And so it was an interesting conversation because our group was able to take each of those ideas and say, well, yeah, God's been doing that for me. God's been providing for me. God's been protecting me. God's been giving me, you know, some new ideas about how I can pivot my business and stay afloat during this COVID shutdown. It was harder for each of the participants to think about, well, how does what we're actually doing as a company match each of those three ideas of building, protecting, and providing. And I think that in talking about moving above the line, in addition to some of the things that you were saying, it's kind of like, well, if we can step back and think about the actual work we're doing, because that's what you're going to do all day. Like, you're going to actually do the work all day. You're not going to pray all day. You're not going to, I mean, if you're really good with your scripture memory, I guess you could put scripture all day, but you know, you're being paid to actually do something, a task, you know, make a product, provide a service. How does that product or service build? How does it protect? How does it provide? So, like, to get down, that was their home. So we'll see how well they did when we get together next month. But it's kind of like, how can pull apart the granular work you're doing on a day-to-day basis and really connect it with what God is still doing in the world as a creator. And then that helps pull us above the line. And so if Volca runs out of money and I need to do delivery for a while, I'm still providing. I'm still joining God and providing, especially now, like we appreciate those who are doing delivery for us way more than we used to, probably. At least we do in New York, just because that's, they're risking, that's on their health. We know they're making it possible for us to continue to do our work because we're busier than ever. And it's like seeing that as a way that things get provided. So there's some thought work there that needs to be done and probably talked about in community and reinforced over and over again to pull us up from that secular bottom up into the sacred space.
Yeah, I love that. I was thinking, as you were talking about the delivery people, also the environmental health people in hospitals, just super grateful for them and all of the healthcare workers. And I know there's been a lot of appreciation for them in New York, as well as here and in Nashville too. So when I think about, we had about 30%, I believe, that are thinking of job transition. This would be, I'm trying to think about what that would be like to be looking for a job right now. And we have another poll, and I would like to put that up and then maybe have a few comments about that, Chip, to get your thoughts on it. So how confident do you feel, would you feel if you had to begin a job search today? And if you all would please take about 10 seconds and fill that out, I would appreciate it. And I have to host says, can you take 10 seconds? It's like, really? Only 10 seconds? But it feels longer over here.
Indeed.
In some ways, I could see that this could be a really forgiving time to be looking for a job, as well as hard. So let's see what we got. Okay, so we have 2 that are confident, 4 somewhat, 6 unconfident. Nobody's very unconfident.
Nobody wanted to admit they were very unconfident.
That would be me. Yeah, okay.
Well, we find that at least the people that we talk to, which is a specific group, but you find that people often sense they're unprepared. Once they actually get into search, they realize they're unprepared. A lot of us early on, we seem to be able to, things fall in place, or there's not as much at stake, and one job leads to another. We get asked to go over here, or that kind of thing, and then at some point you hit a wall, and all your old techniques and all your old connections aren't able to deliver, and you're found in the middle of a search which is taking longer and longer than you expected. And so we find that's really normal. Right now we're finding that a lot of hiring is on hold. So that's in industries that are okay, and then you've got whole spaces that have been wiped out. Entertainment, restaurants, those types of things, and people thinking like, am I going to go back to that, or am I going to do something else? I guess I would summarize is that I would say most people actually they either get a job really quickly, or they end up realizing I'm kind of prepared, and that's kind of normal. And that's why in the series that we're doing, we're kind of going from the big picture to the practical. So this week we talked in very big, kind of big 35,000 feet. How do we find meaning in our work? Well, we do it from a sense of calling. We understand what calling really looks like, and we understand that if we approach our work from a sacred perspective, even if it ends up being chore work, or elements of it are chore work, it's still meaningful because God is growing us through it. And when we find those things that align, it's a gift. So next week we're going to talk more about I need to advance our slide here.
Yeah,
See, I can't do two things at once, Rosalind, so you should talk right now.
Okay. I think one of the things that's really important is job search is hard no matter when, and it's pretty, it would be even more challenging. And I think what you just said is that we're giving people a baseline to be much more stable and a stronger foundation to start planning from, to go into job search, or in the case of one of our attendees is currently in the job search. So, how do you transition that to be a bit more purposeful, meaningful, have a process that you're following, and look at it as work? And I think next week what Chip will talk about in more detail is going in deeper to that framework. To match your gifts, your skills that you have, and how to start thinking about where you want to take those and the impact that you want to make, and you want to share, or not share, that's my word, but you want to tell somebody who says, what can you do for my business? How do you start to frame that to be meaningful, impactful to that business? And yeah, talk about this.
So next week we'll talk a little bit more. It's a little bit more personal next week about how we find the job that matches us. And then the last week in the webinar, we're going to talk about the mechanics of job search. And in the meantime, we have a job search guide, and it goes along with the job search training that we're going to follow up this webinar series with. So this webinar series is over starting in July. We're going to offer 10 weeks of virtual training in how to search for a job. It's going to include an assessment that will help you identify your transferable skills. And we use a digital manager that helps you keep track of all your tasks. And the big idea is that we want to teach you how to be really good at looking for a job. And most of us will need these skills at some point. Some of us may already need them right now, and some of us will need them really soon. And so this is different than, we're not helping you find a job. We're not giving you a fish, we're teaching you how to fish. We're giving you a loaf of bread, we're teaching you how to bake. And we think that, as we've been through this journey ourselves, and then I say we because there's a team of us at Volca, and who will be helping with NAFW to bring this to you. As we've been through this type of transition ourselves, and as we've interfaced with recruiters and chief talent officers and people who really, they see a lot of resumes, they see a lot of job seekers. We've really tried to cull together the best types of exercises and practices to give you the best chance of being able to go out with confidence into the job market. And confidence is really a big piece of this, Rosewyn, because especially even if you lose your job because of COVID, it's an easy story in the sense that there's a lot of this going on, and but it's still a blow to your sense of ego, your sense of security, so we want to help you have a balanced sense of confidence, based on how God's made you, and then based on the fact that you have some wisdom about what to do. If I know, well, this is who I am, and now I know kind of how to approach this. Even though the process may take longer than you want, it almost always does, unfortunately. At least you can feel like, well, I'm on the right road, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. And I think it's like, when you're out of a job, your vocational calling is finding a job. Your job is finding a job. And we want to help you do that. We want to walk along with you in that and give you that sense of direction and clarity that makes that, a much more positive journey than it would be otherwise.
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of places to go to for advice, but this is a very comprehensive. The thing I like about it, and I'm just speaking for myself, and I believe in this, and this is why we want to share this today and over the next 2 weeks, is that to have a framework that's comprehensive, that it looks at you as an individual, looks at the marketplace, looks at, realistically and pragmatically, what do you need to do, and how do you get someone to walk and help you through it. And you need that. When you're going through a job search, you need that objectivity and you need that process. And so I would encourage you all to join us again next Wednesday, again at 11:30. This is being recorded, so you can have access to it later. And I'd also just want to see if there's any other questions. One final question, or not one, we're able to stay on. So if you guys would, if some people need to hop at 12:30, that's fine. But Chip and I are willing and want to stay on just to see if there might be more questions that you might have that we could ask or answer. Not ask, but answer. If you're looking for more examples or want a little bit more insight to what this career navigator is, we'd be happy to do that. And while you're perhaps thinking of a question, I'll just say that you'll get an email from us that will have links to a free guide. And then you will also, there'll be a survey in there. We'd very much appreciate if you would share your opinions with us about today's session. That would be very helpful for us.
Yeah, just to reiterate, yeah, because there's two things, and I may have made it confusing. So there is a job search training. No, I think I'm gonna own that one. There's a job search training course that's going to start after this webinar series. It's going to start in July. Anyone who signs up with interest in that, you're going to receive a 12-page, a 10-page printed guide on, these are all the steps you need to go through to search well. So the guide and the course are separate, and they
Thank
work.
you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I want to say again how grateful I am that you all joined us today. And we are hopeful that this was informative to you and gives you some additional insight and some hope and a firm foundation. You can see that starting to develop for your, either whether it's finding meaning in today, the work that you are doing, or as you think about preparing for transition, or how to actively search today. We want to be able to support you. I don't have any other comments. Chip, do you have anything you want to say final?
No, no, I think we'll see everybody next week, and there'll be more opportunity for Q&A. So some of these things sort of sink in, and you may have further thoughts or what's that really look like. We're happy to answer those types of questions, and we can do it next time.
Great. All right. I wish you all a fantastic day, and we will see you next Wednesday. Bye, everybody.